In the ruins of war, silence speaks louder than victory. Buried beneath archives erased from headlines and sealed in vaults, lie stories not meant to be told, whispers of vanished convoys, unmarked experiments, and signals that should never have been heard. Each fragment of truth is a scar across history, a reminder that shadows move where the light dares not. Tonight, we unlock what was hidden, though some doors were never meant to open. In June 1942, Convoy PQ-17 departed Iceland with 35 merchant ships carrying tanks, aircraft and munitions for the Soviet Union. Escorted by Royal Navy cruisers and destroyers, the convoy was a lifeline in the Lend-Lease program, braving German U-boats, Luftwaffe bombers and surface raiders. The disaster of PQ-17, scattered and devastated after Admiralty orders forced it to disperse, remains one of the most studied catastrophes of the Arctic convoys. But buried within fragmentary reports and redacted archives is reference to something stranger: the disappearance of an unlisted vessel, allegedly operating as part of the escort screen. Surviving convoy logs from HMS Keppel, an escort destroyer, mention receiving signals from a trailing frigate identified by the call sign HN-42. The Royal Navy maintained no such vessel on its rolls, yet several surviving merchant sailors later claimed they had seen a small escort ship that appeared intermittently in fog banks never clearly identified, broadcasting recognition codes consistent with Allied cipher tables. Soviet post-war files declassified in 1991 describe it as a phantom escort, carrying cargo distinct from the convoy's declared manifests, specialized radar equipment, and decoded fragments of German naval orders concerning Operation Seelover, the shelved 1940 invasion plan of Britain. On July 4, 1942, the day PQ-17 was ordered to scatter, this escort allegedly signaled distress. Fragments of intercepted wireless traffic, retrieved decades later from Admiralty archives, contain references to engine failure and a suspicious transmission emanating from the same frequency. Some within the convoy reported the frigate changing course eastward toward the Norwegian coastline held by the Kriegsmarine, rather than following dispersal orders to Archangel. The ship, if it existed, never reappeared. The Soviets, in their archived naval communiques, identified the missing escort as carrying Type 79 radar prototypes, an early form of airborne interception radar that the British were rumored to be field testing in limited numbers. Whether true or not, German naval records from U-255 mention recovering classified material from the wreckage of an unknown vessel sunk off Novaya Zemlya around July 10th. The Kriegsmarine log, cryptically, notes no crew recovered, cargo secured, order from BDU, immediate transfer to Kiel. BDU, or Befehlshaber der Unterseeboote, was Admiral Dönitz's U-boat command. Questions of betrayal emerged from debriefings of Soviet survivors conducted in Arkhangelsk in late 1942. Several sailors testified to receiving conflicting navigation signals that lured dispersed ships into Luftwaffe attack corridors. One survivor, Petty Officer Ivan Zorin, recalled, "They told us to turn north. Then another voice, the same call sign, told us east. We thought one was false. But which?" His testimony, kept classified until 1989, suggested the possibility of a compromised Allied frequency. British intelligence has never acknowledged the existence of such interference. When the Admiralty reviewed PQ-17 losses post-war, the official record mentioned Luftwaffe reconnaissance and U-boat wolf packs. Nowhere was the Phantom escort noted. Yet in 1978, researcher Nigel West, combing through partially declassified SOE files, found mention of escort HN-42 lost under disputed circumstances. The file was heavily redacted. Most of its content remained withheld under Section 3 of the Official Secrets Act. West claimed that its reference linked to captured Abwehr, German military intelligence, ciphers, describing an Allied vessel delivering documents and equipment intended for Russian liaison at Murmansk. The Soviets, meanwhile, insisted privately that the British withheld evidence. A KGB memorandum dated 1961, referencing PQ-17, stated, "British concealment of vessel loss connected to betrayal of radar technology, suspect deliberate erasure from records." This memorandum was discovered after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 in the Moscow archives. To this day, no Allied or Axis record has confirmed the exact identity of HN-42. The location of its supposed sinking remains contested. Soviet sonar sweeps of the Barents Sea in the 1970s reported an unidentified wreck at a depth of 340 meters, roughly 120 nautical miles northeast of Murmansk. Western researchers have suggested this could be one of the many merchantmen scattered during the convoy's destruction. But in a peculiar detail, the wreck showed signs of internal explosion rather than torpedo strike. One diver's preliminary sketch indicated small compact structure, inconsistent with merchant hull design. The question then lingers, was HN-42 a legitimate vessel, an unlisted experimental escort, or a fabrication born of panic and confusion during a disastrous operation? Skeptics argue that convoy sailors may have misidentified vessels amidst the chaos of scattering orders, fog, and Luftwaffe bombardment. Others suggest the ship was an SOE-operated auxiliary, stripped from records to conceal an intelligence mission gone wrong. The most unsettling clue lies in a German naval dispatch dated July 14, 1942, preserved in the Bundesarchiv. The dispatch references delivery of British equipment consistent with Funkmessgerät radar system, partially intact, retrieved from unregistered enemy vessel. The existence of this dispatch is verified, though the cargo itself has never been confirmed. What remains inexplicable is how German U-boats, stretched thin in Arctic operations, could intercept a vessel detached from the convoy unless guided by intelligence in advance. PQ-17's tragedy destroyed nearly two-thirds of its merchant ships. Thousands of tons of cargo never reached the Soviet Union. Yet the mystery of HN-42, the Phantom Escort, continues to trouble naval historians. Was it a victim of navigational chaos, a ghost of mistaken reports, or evidence of something darker, a betrayal concealed within the fog of war? To this day, the Admiralty's files on PQ-17 remain partly sealed, with several entries marked not to be released until 2042. For the families of the lost, and for those who still question whether classified technology vanished into the Barents Sea that summer, the silence speaks louder than any record. On April 20, 1945, as the Third Reich collapsed under advancing Allied armies, a small OSS detachment entered the Bavarian town of Mittenwald. Their mission was not to liberate, but to recover documents, prototypes, and intelligence tied to a program referenced in scattered decrypted SS communiques as Project Morgenstern. Though the term never appeared in official Allied post-war reports, fragments of these operations were unearthed decades later in heavily censored US Army files under the classification Operation Ashen Cross. The OSS team, drawn from detachment R6, included technical officers and translators trained in chemical and nuclear physics. Their reports, later referenced by historian Donald McHale, describe a warehouse filled with wooden crates marked with SS runes and the eagle insignia of the Reichsforschungsrat, the German Research Council. Contents ranged from dismantled gyroscopes and high-grade vacuum tubes to diagrams written in technical shorthand, inconsistent with ordinary Luftwaffe engineering. One debrief memorandum dated May 3, 1945, recorded blueprints correspond to advanced delivery systems, non-conventional payloads, references to Sonnenaufgang, possible codename or device. That memorandum remains classified in its entirety. Only the summary was ever released. Eyewitnesses, both civilian and military, recalled unusual convoys in those final weeks. Residents of Mittenwald spoke of trains heading east toward Czechoslovakia, guarded by Waffen-SS units armed with automatic weapons, moving under cover of darkness. A Czech resistance courier later claimed these shipments were destined for underground tunnels near Plzeň, though this testimony was dismissed at Nuremberg as speculative. Yet Soviet NKVD files released in the 1990s corroborate unusual traffic in the region between April 1827, citing rail transports carrying technical cargo origin Bavaria, intercepted by Soviet patrols, no survivors. Officially, nothing of significance was recovered. The US Army's final technical report on German war materiel, dated 1946, makes no mention of Morgenstern or Ashen Cross. Instead, the files simply note miscellaneous aeronautical instruments and incomplete V weapons. Yet among classified CIA holdings declassified in 2001, researchers uncovered a curious annotation: Morgenstern documentation, secured, transfer to Fort Strong, subsequent integration into early AAF research. Fort Strong, an island installation in Boston Harbor, was used for classified ordnance analysis in the immediate post-war years. No subsequent records describe what became of the documentation. For the Soviets, Morgenstern never truly disappeared. In Prague, during the 1968 uprising, demonstrators stormed a Ministry of Interior building, briefly accessing secret files before Warsaw Pact forces restored control. Among scattered papers later smuggled to the West was a Soviet intelligence digest referencing Morgenstern apparatus incorporated into rocket development at Kapustin Yar, 1947-1950. Western analysts dismissed the document as Cold War disinformation, yet the specific technical language, references to multiple axis control and payload stabilization under rapid ascent, resembled research challenges of early nuclear missile programs. Historians examining German sources found little trace of the program. SS records were destroyed in mass burnings across southern Germany. However, a single surviving letter, written by SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler in February 1944, includes the line, "Morgenstern progresses, though incomplete. Ensure relocation before collapse." Kammler, responsible for V2 production and rumored post-war disappearance, remains a shadowy figure in this story. Some suggest his death was staged and that he brokered Morgenstern materials to advancing allies in exchange for protection. The American silence on Ashen Cross is equally troubling. Freedom of Information requests in the 1980s produced denials, yet redacted logbooks show OSS technical units dispatched to Bavaria far beyond their usual operational zones. Why assign atomic physicists to search a rural warehouse if only conventional material was expected? Equally puzzling are financial records showing the US Army requisitioned 27 sealed freight cars in May 1945, labeled engineering materials, sensitive, and shipped them via Bremerhaven to the United States. Their contents remain unknown. German witnesses interviewed post-war recalled peculiar equipment loaded onto rail cars. Metal cylinders, larger than torpedoes, but with no fins, marked with the Black Sun emblem. The reference to the esoteric Seresi Schwarze Sonne symbol has been a point of contention. Skeptics argue witnesses conflated memory with rumor. Yet the presence of markings not normally seen on weapons shipments raises questions of what precisely Morgenstern encompassed: nuclear, chemical, or entirely different experimental technology. The Soviets pursued their own trail. Documents in the former KGB archive suggest a recovery operation near Plzeň in May 1945, codenamed Sokol. According to a report by Colonel Ivan Serov, fragments of Morgenstern equipment, incomplete, shipped to Moscow under highest secrecy. Serov's memorandum, however, contradicts US claims of seizure, hinting that both superpowers may have acquired different portions of the program. The lack of any mention at Nuremberg, where even speculative Nazi projects were aired in detail, suggests coordinated suppression. By the early Cold War, Morgenstern seemed to vanish into the shadows of missile development and intelligence rivalry. Yet faint echoes appear in unexpected places. In a 1957 Rand Corporation paper on ballistic missile stability, an unnamed appendix cites German Oscillation Control Research, 1945. When researchers later sought the source, Rand claimed the appendix had been destroyed. In 1962, a Czech engineer defecting to the West told CIA interrogators that Morgenstern was not a weapon, but a system, a way to deliver with precision. His full testimony remains classified. The true scope of Operation Ashen Cross is known only in fragments: an OSS recovery in Bavaria, mysterious convoys toward Czechoslovakia, scattered Soviet intelligence reports, and the vanishing of key documents into US archives. Some historians argue Morgenstern was exaggerated, an unfinished dead end like many late-war German projects. Others see its traces in the evolution of Cold War missile technology, not as a weapon completed in 1945, but as a seed planted in the rubble, cultivated secretly by both East and West. The shadows of Morgenstern linger not in official histories, but in the silence of files withheld. Why classify a dead project for 75 years if nothing of consequence was found? Why redact notations of equipment, technical officers, and shipments? Until the final pages of Ashen Cross are released, if they ever are, the truth will remain buried beneath layers of denial, suspicion, and the uneasy alliance of victors who chose to forget what they seized in the last days of the Reich. In February 1947, 2 years after Japan's surrender, the U.S. Army's Counterintelligence Corps launched a discreet operation in the Philippines. Officially, the mission was to investigate remaining caches of looted gold, remnants of Golden Lily, the Japanese plunder scheme overseen by General Tomoyuki Yamashita. Unofficially, a classified directive circulated through G2 Intelligence Command indicated something else: rumors of Imperial Japanese chemical stockpiles hidden deep within Luzon's mountains. This operation, known later in whispers as the Manila Dossier, has remained shrouded in silence ever since. The first lead came from a Japanese engineer detained at New Bilibid prison. Interrogation transcripts, declassified only in fragments, reveal he described storage galleries dug into the Sierra Madre range, reinforced with concrete, lined with air filtration systems. He claimed the tunnels contained not only bullion, but sealed drums marked with the chrysanthemum crest, containing what he called tokushu bushitsu, special substances. These were consistent with code names used by the Imperial, Japanese Army's Unit 731 and Unit 100. Infamous for biological and chemical experimentation in China, the engineer insisted these caches were left behind during the chaotic retreat of 1944. On March 8, 1947, a combined team of U.S. Army engineers and CIC officers, supported by Filipino guides, entered a suspected site near Nueva Ecija. Field notes, partially preserved in a damaged archive box at the U.S. National Archives, described narrow shafts descending into reinforced chambers. Several crates containing rusted artillery shells were recovered, their stenciled markings in Japanese. The shells, according to chemical warfare specialists later consulted, bore similarities to mustard gas ordnance. Within weeks, the crates were quietly shipped to Manila Harbor, loaded onto a U.S. transport vessel bound for San Francisco. The official shipping manifest listed only captured enemy munitions. What happened next is where the trail darkens. A warehouse fire in Manila on April 17, 1947, destroyed the remaining evidence. The blaze consumed stacks of files stored in a Quonset hut, including reports on Golden Lily recoveries and testimonies from Japanese prisoners. The official investigation attributed the fire to faulty wiring, yet a surviving memo from Colonel James R. Newman of the CIC noted, "Critical materials lost. Request secured duplicates from Washington. Whether such duplicates existed is unclear. No corresponding files have surfaced." Survivors of the operation later recounted unsettling details. One engineer, interviewed in 1965 under anonymity, claimed that drums were leaking, emitting a pungent odor that caused dizziness and skin irritation. He alleged that samples were taken under armed guard and shipped separately to the United States, labeled as soil specimens. Another source, a Filipino scout who guided the Americans, described trucks carrying crates not to Manila Harbor, but to Clark Air Base, under heavy military police escort. These accounts, though unverified, align with broader suspicions of post-war American interest in Japanese chemical and biological research. Fort Detrick, Maryland, the center of U.S. biological warfare research, appears tangentially in this story. A 1949 progress report, unearthed in the early 2000s, contained a brief cryptic entry. Foreign material, Asian origin, derived from captured munitions, 1947 Manila. Analysis ongoing. Though the report did not explicitly reference the dossier, the timing and phrasing match the missing Luzon shipment. Fort Detrick's archives remain largely sealed, citing national security concerns. The Manila Dossier also intersects with darker intelligence arrangements. During the early occupation of Japan, U.S. officials shielded Unit 731 leaders from prosecution in exchange for their research data. Could the Philippine discovery have been part of this pattern, not simply seizing weapons, but absorbing knowledge, however unethical, into America's Cold War arsenal? Japanese testimony, preserved in post-war Diet hearings, hints that stockpiles were deliberately left behind to delay Allied pursuit. Whether this was sabotage or an unintentional legacy remains debated. Adding to the intrigue, in 1953, a classified CIA cable mentioned Philippine materials in the context of Project MK Naomi, a covert program studying toxins and delivery systems. The cable, later declassified in part, was redacted heavily but retained the reference to Luzon origins. By then, the Manila fire and the missing dossier ensured no traceable accountability. Filipino villages near Nueva Ecija long whispered of sicknesses following the war, livestock dying suddenly, children suffering unexplained skin lesions. Oral histories collected in the 1970s describe soldiers sealing tunnels with explosives, warning locals never to return. Some caves remain blocked to this day, their concrete seals cracked but still intact, marked with rusting barbed wire. Philippine government attempts to reopen the sites in the 1990s were abruptly halted, with officials citing environmental hazards. Independent researchers believe the danger lies not only in unstable tunnels, but in what was buried inside them. What makes the Manila Dossier so troubling is not only what was found, but what disappeared. Records vanish conveniently. Interrogation transcripts incomplete. Shipping logs altered. Reports lost to fire. The few surviving fragments converge on a pattern of deliberate erasure. If true, this raises disturbing questions. Did the US government conceal the existence of Japanese chemical stockpiles? Were samples smuggled into Fort Detrick for experimentation? And if so, what became of the materials, destroyed or integrated into ongoing weapons research? No official acknowledgement has ever been given. Inquiries by historians have been stonewalled. The US Army Corps of Engineers denies involvement. The Philippine government, facing its own crises, never pressed the issue. For decades, the Manila Dossier has existed only in whispers among researchers who piece together the fragments. Yet the shadow of what may lie sealed in Luzon's tunnels remains. To this day, villagers speak of ghostly convoys of trucks that rolled through their towns at night in 1947, guarded by American soldiers who never explained their mission. Some insist the tunnels still hold drums of chemicals, untouched and leaking into the soil. Others believe everything was taken, erased from Philippine soil, hidden away in American laboratories. Between missing files, destroyed warehouses, and sealed archives, the truth remains elusive. What is certain is that in 1947, US investigators uncovered something in the mountains of Luzon, and the record of it was made to vanish. In the summer of 1946, Scandinavian skies filled with reports of strange projectiles, luminous objects streaking at high altitude, maneuvering in ways inconsistent with meteor showers. Newspapers dubbed them ghost rockets, a phenomenon dismissed by Western governments as hysteria or natural events. Yet declassified Swedish Air Force documents, released piecemeal in the 1980s, tell a different story. Radar tracks, precise flight paths, and desperate attempts to intercept something very real. The first sightings came in May 1946, near Lake Mjøsa in Norway. Civilians reported cigar-shaped objects leaving vapor trails, traveling at speeds greater than conventional aircraft. By July, Swedish radar installations at Härnösand and Boden recorded repeated trajectories entering from the east, crossing over the Gulf of Bothnia, and vanishing at high altitude. Air Force Commander Bengt Nordenskjöld ordered classified investigations under the codename Project Eldbola, Fireball Project. Internal memoranda describe controlled flights, some lasting over 2 minutes, suggesting propulsion far beyond random debris or meteor activity. On August 19, 1946, a declassified signal from Sweden's defense staff noted, "Radar confirms elongated objects, velocity exceeding Mach 1, trajectory origin, Soviet-controlled Baltic territories, no debris recovered. Recommend secrecy to avoid public alarm." That same week, RAF liaison officers stationed in Stockholm forwarded urgent cables to London, warning that Sweden suspected post-war German technology tests under Soviet custody. British responses, later uncovered in the Public Record Office, advised caution. Official position meteorological, unofficial assessment, possible V2 derivative, contain press speculation. Several attempts were made to recover wreckage. On July 10th, Swedish search teams combed a remote forest near Lake Kölmjärv, following reports of an impact. The site revealed burned trees, scorched soil, and metallic fragments resembling engine casing, quickly removed by military police. The official report later stated, "No material of significance found." Yet photographs leaked in the 1970s showed officers carrying elongated debris under tarpaulins. Swedish authorities neither confirmed nor denied the authenticity of these images. At the time, Europe was still reeling from the dispersal of German rocket engineers. Some, like Werner von Braun, were transferred to the United States under Operation Paperclip. Others were taken by the Soviets, relocated to facilities near Moscow and later to Kapustin Yar. Ghost rocket sightings in Scandinavia coincided eerily with Soviet test launches of adapted V2 technology. Declassified CIA cables from 1947 describe probable correlation between Northern European sightings and Soviet experimentation. One cable, marked urgent, noted, "Swedish radar indicates intentional overflight. Suggests Soviet psychological probe or navigational error. Scandinavian pilots scrambled repeatedly to intercept." On September 18, 1946, 2 Swedish J-22 fighters pursued a luminous object over Uppsala. The pilots described it as metallic, cigar-like, no wings, emitting exhaust flame. Their pursuit failed. The object accelerated beyond visual range. In his logbook, one pilot wrote, "Not a meteor, not an aircraft we know felt we were being observed." This testimony was suppressed until his death in 1973, when his family released excerpts. The fear was not merely technological. Sweden, officially neutral, found itself at the crossroads of East-West espionage. US diplomats pressed Stockholm to share radar logs, while Soviet envoys warned against Western exploitation of rumors. In a confidential 1947 briefing, the Swedish cabinet debated whether to publicize findings. Defense Minister Alan Vout reportedly argued, "If these are Soviet rockets, admission would expose our vulnerability. If they are not, we face an unknown. In either case, silence protects us." The cabinet agreed. Publicly, ghost rockets were attributed to meteors. Privately, files were sealed. The classified archive grew. One Swedish Air Force dossier, declassified, in 1985, contained 247 incident reports, complete with maps, sketches, and weather conditions. Many described objects maneuvering at low altitude, banking sharply before ascending. A minority mentioned faint humming sounds. Radar analysis from 1947 concluded, "Patterns exhibit guidance capability inconsistent with natural phenomena. Probability of controlled flight high." Despite this, official statements continued to cite meteors. The Soviets, for their part, never acknowledged such tests. Yet captured German scientists later hinted that early post-war rocket launches were conducted near Peenemunde's dismantled sites and in northern ranges before consolidation at Kapustin Yar. A defector, interviewed by the CIA in 1953, claimed, "We launched prototypes over the Baltic. Some strayed north. The Swedes saw what they should not have seen." His testimony remains classified in part. What troubles researchers is the complete absence of physical evidence. Despite hundreds of sightings, no confirmed debris exists in public archives. Some argue all material was confiscated by Swedish or foreign intelligence. Others believe the objects disintegrated on impact, leaving only scorched soil. Yet the consistency of radar tracks, speed, altitude, origin, points away from coincidence. By the early 1950s, ghost rocket reports dwindled, replaced by Cold War UFO sightings. In Sweden, the files remained sealed until the late 20th century, fueling speculation of cover-up. Historians who examined them concluded the phenomenon was real, though its cause remains debated. Soviet tests, classified Allied experiments, or something else entirely. What is clear is that in 1946-47, Scandinavia became an unwitting observation post for the dawn of the Cold War arms race. The ghost rockets remind us of the perilous uncertainty of the time, when fragments of Nazi technology scattered across victorious powers re-emerged in secret tests that blurred the line between rumor and classified fact. Whether deliberate Soviet intimidation, navigational mishaps, or evidence of an accelerated missile program, the events over Scandinavia were never explained. The silence of both East and West suggests something was indeed at stake, something both sides preferred forgotten. To this day, Sweden's defense staff maintains one official explanation: meteors. The radar logs tell another story. On the night of November 3, 1947, operators at RAF Chicksands, Bedfordshire, intercepted an anomalous shortwave transmission. The signal, originating somewhere within Czechoslovakia, repeated a phrase in German, Schlüssel vergessen, key forgotten, followed by sequences of 5-digit numbers. The pattern bore all the hallmarks of a one-time pad cipher, the method favored by wartime intelligence services. Over the next 4 years, the so-called Prague Signal recurred intermittently, always in bursts at irregular intervals, always carrying the same cryptic phrase. The intercept station, part of Britain's WWII service, logged the signal meticulously. Each entry in the Special Frequencies Register was marked with urgency. Analysts at Bletchley Park, then transitioning into GCHQ, cross-referenced the format against captured German codes. To their surprise, the structure matched abandoned Abwehr transmissions from 1943, long after the German intelligence service had been absorbed into the SS. One surviving memorandum, dated January 14, 1948, noted, "Strong indications of continuity with Abwehr cipher groups. Origin unexplained, Soviet deception unlikely." The line "Soviet deception unlikely" was later struck out in red pencil. MI6 assigned a small working group to the case under the internal designation Operation Grey Lantern. Their brief was to determine whether the signal represented a Nazi stay-behind network, a rogue Allied operation, or Soviet disinformation. The stakes were high. In post-war Europe, both NATO and the Warsaw Pact hunted for remnants of clandestine networks. If the Prague Signal came from surviving German assets, it suggested a continuity of operations the Allies had failed to dismantle. Technically, the signal was unusual. Logs described transmissions on frequencies between 7.3 and 9.1 MHz, shifting slightly each broadcast. Operators noted distortions consistent with mobile transmitters, not fixed installations. Yet triangulation attempts repeatedly pointed to the Prague region, an area tightly controlled by the Soviets after 1948. The British concluded either the source was deliberately masked or that remnants of pre-war equipment were being used, covertly under Soviet noses. The phrase itself, key forgotten key, carried ominous weight. Declassified GCHQ files reveal it appeared in 2 separate contexts. Once in an intercepted Abwehr message in March 1943, believed to reference a cipher compromise, and again in a 1944 MI6 training manual on counterintelligence, where it served as a sample phrase for radio drills. How it resurfaced in 1947 in live broadcasts from Prague defied explanation. Some suspected a deliberate taunt, a signal to Allied intelligence officers that someone still held wartime keys, literal or metaphorical. Within Czechoslovakia, events deepened the mystery. In 1949, as the Communist Party consolidated power, Czech State Security, STB, arrested several former German intelligence officers who had remained in the country under false identities. According to a CIA memorandum, at least one detainee mentioned old codes still in use during interrogation. Yet records of the interrogations vanished in the chaos of Stalinist purges. Western intelligence never learned whether the detainees were connected to the Prague Signal. By 1950, British cryptanalysts had catalogued over 300 Prague Signal broadcasts. Despite intensive effort, none were fully decrypted. The use of one-time pads made the sequences impenetrable without the original key sheets. Analysts speculated whether the numbers were operational instructions, dead letter drop coordinates, or mere filler to conceal a simpler message. A GCHQ note from March 1950 reads, "If deception, it is elaborate. If genuine, it represents network continuity at odds with all current intelligence." The ambiguity haunted MI6 leadership. The final known broadcast occurred on June 21, 1951. At 02:14 GMT, operators logged a brief sequence, shorter than usual, ending abruptly mid-transmission. Unlike previous intercepts, no phrase preceded the numbers. The log simply notes, "Signal terminated, no recurrence." Despite extensive monitoring, no further Prague signal was ever detected. It ended as suddenly as it began, leaving only questions. In the aftermath, official explanations diverged. Publicly, the British government dismissed post-war phantom transmissions as atmospheric anomalies or Soviet experiments. Privately, MI6 debated whether the Prague signal was a vestige of German intelligence networks folded into Soviet structures, or an Allied-controlled operation that outlived its mandate. Some files hint at the possibility of a rogue British unit maintaining wartime channels without authorization, though this theory remains speculative. One of the most provocative discoveries came decades later. In 1994, researchers accessing newly opened Czech archives found a reference in SETB files to broadcasts of German origin, monitored 1947-1950. Purpose unclear. Orders from Moscow, suppress inquiry. The note suggests the Soviets were aware of the transmissions yet deliberately obscured their source. Why they tolerated or concealed the signal remains unanswered. Historians today still debate the Prague signal. Some argue it was Soviet psychological warfare designed to confuse Western intelligence. Others see it as the remnant of an underground Nazi stay-behind network, similar to the werewolf operations rumored but never fully substantiated. A minority suggest it was an Allied deception, a Cold War game never acknowledged. The truth, like the transmissions, fades into static. What endures are the records, hundreds of log sheets in the archives of RAF Chiksans and GCHQ, marked with careful handwriting and the same repeated phrase. Schlüssel vergessen. The forgotten key. Whether code, taunt, or warning, it encapsulates the enduring uncertainty of the early Cold War. A world where shadows of the Second World War bled seamlessly into the paranoia of the next conflict, and where signals from the ether carried secrets no one has yet unlocked. The war ended on paper, but in the shadows it never ceased. Ghost convoys drifted into the sea, weapons vanished into new hands, and broadcasts bled through the static long after the guns fell silent. Some truths were buried, not lost, waiting, like embers beneath ash for someone to uncover them. The question is not whether they existed, but whether we should have ever dared to look for them.